One.
Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. Thank you for joining us once again for Peikoff Wednesdays and Keeping It Real. I am joined, as always, by the amazing James Valliant. James, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing amazingly. I'm fabulous, as you know, and I suspect you are equally fabulous and amazing as well.
I am, my friend, and it is good to count you amongst one of my bosom pals. I love the idea of bosom buddies, bosom pals. We think of Anne Shirley and Diana Barry and Anne of Green Gables. You know,
Yes.
these great friendships that are in not necessarily children's books, but youth-oriented novels. Think of Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, or if you want to be more contemporary, think of Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and oh, excuse me. You ever lose a name like that? Why did Hermione Granger suddenly escape from my brain? These great friendships in youth-oriented novels, and there are great friendships in serious literature as well.
Absolutely. What about the friendships in Atlas Shrugged between Galt, Danconia, and Danaskjöld?
Yes.
Lifetime bosom buddies, if you will, committed to the same values, even if their approaches are different. Yeah. I love presentations of friendships or relationships like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in
what about
Ayn Rand's
Peikoff?
stories, well, yeah, there's a temptation, I think, among a certain kind of fan of Ayn Rand, or especially among critics of Ayn Rand. They don't always get the passion of these friendships. But Ayn Rand's friendships, at their best, these are like love stories.
They are.
The relationship, and even love-hate relationships. Think of the love triangles in We the Living or Red Pawn, but especially Howard Rourke and Gail Wynand.
Ayn Rand conceived of that, in effect, as an asexual love story. When she wrote about it in her notes, or when she responded to people about the subject, they said, wow, the Gail and Howard seem to have a particularly close relationship. And she would respond just like that. Yes, it's love in everything but the sexual sense. That is what I meant to convey. They have a deep spiritual connection. It's just not a romantic one, which is really fascinating. She believed that there could be powerful friendships, strong relationships of that depth and meaning.
And we talk about that, in the usual sense, the general sense of the without philosophy, but then it gets fuzzy. We talk about, what we would sacrifice for people. We talk about unconditional love. But imagine if you took friendship as seriously as you took business, not in the sense of being, cold and rational, but as serious and passionate, as high a value, or as your romances. If you took friendship with that level of seriousness. So I can see why some people say, well, objectivism is, all business, all cold, but it's so wrong. It's Ayn Rand saw friendship as something that can be just as serious, just as passionate,
very much
as
so.
Business, as romance. And with that in mind, you've picked a great topic for us today, because the very first question, and this will be a theme throughout the episode, is, well, is having friends necessary to being happy? Leonard Peikoff was asked that question, and he started his answer by explaining the person asking the question was somebody in the Navy. And he says, practically speaking, he can't really connect to other people. He says he has a bad view of people, and he doesn't know what the value is of taking time and energy to find a few good ones. So he basically talks where he can only to his girlfriend. I can't prove for all cases and all situations that it's necessary to have friends. For example, on a deserted island, our producer mentioned that before the show.
Yeah.
But I think you could be happy even if you're alone, or imagine at least a period in your life when you're so involved on a creative project night and day that anyone else would simply be a distraction. Excuse me. Well, we talked about that, James, in the context of romance in the film Whiplash.
Right.
Great example of romance could have been there, but not if he was to achieve his ends.
Right. It's a question of hierarchy of values and context. There have been times in my life where I really needed to kind of be a loner. Not lonely, because there's a huge difference between being alone and being lonely. I like the company I keep. I'm a good, honest, rational person, so I have no problem keeping my own company, and I enjoy keeping my own company. And that, I think, is an important point here. But on the other hand, even when I'm done with that time I need to be alone and finish my project, is there a value to sharing it with other people? Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So it's great that Dr. Peikoff lays that out to say there are exceptions. Yes, that's going to happen. But and then he says, apart from exceptional situations like this, I think there is a natural, rational desire for friendships. Because you live in society, your life depends on the kind of people among whom you live. Those are the people with whom you trade values. It would be quite different if they lived on the moon. They were irrelevant to you. But they're part of your life if you live in society. If you say, well, none of them are any good, well, that is the malevolent universe premise, as Ayn Rand called it, the idea that there is no use trying to pursue values because it's hopeless in this life. Yes, finding friends takes time and effort, and you may not find very many, but I believe that it's worth it for success or full enjoyment of life. You can achieve this with only partial good qualities in people. You don't have to look for the perfect person who fulfills all your values. If you're talking about friendship, well, you can get a lot of pleasure out of someone with talking about, or excuse me, with whom you share some values, even if not all. Now, of course, if you're trying to find people and you just hit a dead end, maybe because you're on a ship or you just can't find any, well, then thank God you've got your girlfriend. She's real. She will easily fulfill your social needs, I assume. So you're lucky in that. And that's the end of Dr. Peikoff's answer to that particular question. But what's amazing to me about living in 2022 is that even if you're on a ship, we have Ayn Rand's writings, so we have clarity in terms of what values are and what that looks like and what we could reasonably talk to our shipmates about, even if we don't have a lot in common. And we've got this crazy internet thing.
Yeah, what a wonderful thing. We're using it right here and now. I can connect, and I connect almost every day with people across my country or across the world in the most astonishing way. I've developed real relationships where I can really interact. And the point Dr. Peikoff makes here too about, no, we're all individuals. No one is going to perfectly mirror my own soul. The idea that I'm going to find all my values in one person and one friend is frankly unrealistic and not desirable even. It's the differences that my differences that I bring to the table and the differences that my friends bring to the table, that's a huge part of the value, as well as the sharing and commonality. But for gosh sakes, I've got my friends in certain contexts and my friends for other contexts. If, for example, I'm devoted, and this is not me, but let's say I was devoted to playing basketball on the weekends. And if I have my basketball friends, it really doesn't much matter to me what their politics are. If they are being, what I need in that sense, rational, enjoying it in the same sort of way I am, getting the same physical and companionship value from this, challenging one another and so forth, that person can absolutely be a friend, absolutely be a high value to me. And I'm never going to find a friend who matches all my values across the board. I think part of it is an unrealistic view of what any one individual could ever do for us. Even, and I'll go this far, even in our romantic lives. Now, it's true in our romantic lives, we reach a point where the gratitude and the admiration overspills and becomes love. And you say, well, it's this whole person that now I'm devoted to and I'm in love with. But even there, you're not going to find a person who's your clone. And in fact, the differences, the complementary differences, are part of the wonderful thing about a romantic relationship. So yeah, if you don't have listen how Ayn Rand says it about romance, but it applies to friendship too. To say love, I love you, one must first be able to say the I. This goes not only for romantic relationships, but for all of our personal relationships. If I don't have an I to bring to our friendship, Robert, and if you don't have an I to bring to our friendship, well, there's really no value for us to exchange, actually. We could be a boring echo chamber of just agreeing with each other, but that would only be, one modest part of the value. So much more of the value, our interaction as individuals, would be lost if we didn't have a firm and distinguished sense of ourselves and maintain that distinguished sense of you and me. That's all I can say. You know, philosophically, the way we ask the question is, do we need other people? And Peikoff gives a really precise answer here. Could I survive on a desert island? Could I find some contentment even on a desert island? But would my life be really full in the complete sense without other people? Could I be completely happy? Look at it this way. Most of the things I know, I learned from other people. Living in a division of labor economy gives me a prosperity and a standard of living I could certainly not achieve on a desert island. Do I need the art that great artists have provided? Is that a vital value to me? Yeah, absolutely. Even forgetting the idea of romance yet. All these other ways in which living in society greatly enriches and enhances my life. I could summarize them by saying to people who are fans of Ayn Rand, what value has Ayn Rand provided you? Do you need Ayn Rand? Let me ask it in that sense. Well, could I have gotten by without Ayn Rand? Sure. But as an artist, as a provider of knowledge, are those really pyramid values for me? Yes, yes. But I'll go through each of those values again. Look, the division of labor economy, for me to get the advantage of that, I've got to pull my own weight. Knowledge, if I'm going to take advantage of this knowledge of the past, I've got to learn it and see it through my own eyes authentically and know it for myself with the evidence and logic. For me to gain the advantage of knowledge and trade and art, I've got to be worthy, in effect, of the artist whose art I'm looking at. They have to be a reflection of my values. If I don't have a self, an independent self, to bring to each of these moments that I get value from other people, I'm not really going to get the value from them. I'm never really going to get the value. And it's especially true. Now I finally get to romance. It's especially true in romantic love. You have to be, you'll be a codependent on someone. You'll begin an unhealthy relationship if you don't begin that romance with a firm sense of self and your boundaries and what your needs are and what your desires are. That is required for a healthy personal relationship. So once again, it's that I component that makes this usefulness and value, which is huge, that other people bring to the table. But for me to access those values, I've got to have a firm sense of self.
Yes. Yeah, I think of the stories of Narcissus and we think, oh, they're anti-egoism. No, there is the case of being with somebody but never actually seeing them, of thinking so much that, nobody else is good because nobody else is like me. One of my favorite talks in objectivism is the talk that Greg Salmieri does on optional values, which he calls personal values in the talk.
Yes.
And it's such a good talk for clarifying, what things are universal and
Right.
what things are not. And it's so easy to judge other people harshly if they don't regard what we think is important as important. But once you understand that, well, here are the principles, and then here are the boundless applications, then we can find friends who don't necessarily share our taste in literature or our taste in music or our interest in sports or whatever the specific values are.
Objectivism. All my friends don't need to be objectivists. Now, it's true that there are certain elements, they have to be this side of rational. They can't be violating my rights. They can't be dishonest people. So the substance of objectivism I will use to judge other people. But the fact that they don't agree with all the principles of Ayn Rand's philosophy really doesn't address all the other things that human beings can be for me. You're my music buddy. You're my basketball buddy. And do I still require a certain level of virtue from them? And in fact, the greater the virtue, the more value do I gain from them? Absolutely. So that's a vital thing that I'm bringing objectivism to the table to judge them, but I'm not judging them because they are or are not necessarily a quote objectivist.
Right. And that's a great perspective. If we, as members of the Ayn Rand Center UK, are going to continue to reach out to people who are not yet fans of Ayn Rand, much less objectivists. Incidentally, speaking of friends across the miles and what the internet makes possible, in the chat, I've got friends right now some of whom are local, some of whom I only know either through the internet or through OCON conferences, but just good people. And some of them are very, very different than me. But we do have values in common, and we have a great time, whether it's in person or over the internet. So thank you to those of you who are in the chat, and there's some good conversation going on there as well. And I appreciate that. And one more thing I'll say about having to have your values line up. There are horror stories and scary movies about people who come along in your life and mimic you, who are exactly like you. And almost invariably, it's somebody either trying to manipulate you or take over your life in some way. It would be scary to meet somebody exactly like you. We want to find kindred spirits. We don't want to find clones.
Oh, exactly. It's the differences. Thank goodness we're all individuals. Thank goodness we all have our own individual contexts. It can be frustrating if people haven't caught up to our level of understanding of something. But then again, I don't know everything, and I'm never going to know everything, and I have to have some respect for the individual's process of learning and discovering. But that's also part of the fun of unwrapping the package that is another human being, another virtuous, benevolent human being.
Yes.
But it is one of the great joys of life to unwrap the package that is the wonderful individual, for example, that you are, Robert Nasir, in my life. So,
well, thank you for that. We do have a super chat, and I've got to say, because we are on the Ayn Rand Center UK's YouTube channel and are happy members of the ARCUK, thank you for any super chats that come in. They do support the organization. While I'm mentioning it, if you're not already a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK, please go to aynrandcenter.co.uk. Link will show up in a moment and become a member. But Bradley is in for €2.49 and says or asks, is love a psychological necessity? Why or why not? Now, we will undoubtedly answer that question, but I think you might find the answer in the rest of this conversation too.
yeah.
So I'm going to hold that in check for now and then get to question number 2, because Leonard Peikoff was asked, excuse me, on his podcast, is loneliness ever experienced by a rational egoist? Would rational egoism preclude loneliness? And let me give part of Dr. Peikoff's answer, and then we'll talk about this. He says, well, what is loneliness? It doesn't just mean being alone. It means finding being alone painful, finding the absence of people in some context painful. And this, like almost everything, can be evidence of a flaw, but it certainly need not be. It's an example of a flaw, for instance, in Peter Keating. He needs people in an improper way. He needs their approval. He needs them around to enable him to escape his inner emptiness, to give him a sense of self-esteem. For him, then, loneliness is a huge issue. It's a metaphysical terror. It's like being cut off from reality. But, neurotic loneliness, or the fear of it, has nothing to do with everybody. You have a rational need of friends or a lover. If you can't find a sympathetic friend or a lover, well, you're lonely. And there's no way to escape that if you value things rationally in other people. Question is, who are you lonely for and why? For example, I dislike living alone, having done so for many years, and I don't think it's because I'm Peter Keating. This is still Leonard answering. You get certain values in living with someone, even over and above a romantic relationship, things you share and things you do together that are perfectly reasonable and that I miss when the person is away. So I'm lonely. Not always, but sometimes. That is perfectly reasonable. He goes on a bit more, but yeah, I think
May I say something here about Ayn Rand's
please.
own life? Ayn Rand was one of the most remarkably self-sufficient humans I've ever heard of. This is a woman, as I've said before, who came halfway around the world to a country where she barely spoke the language, a woman alone at the age of 21, back in the 1920s, determined to make it on her own, and basically did, through a bunch of hard work over decades, turn herself into an international success with the hostility of the culture around her, much less the help of people around her. Now, through the course of her life, did she seek out intellectual allies? Yes, she did. She sought out people who she thought would be intellectual allies. Henry Hazlitt or Isabel Patterson, she developed personal relationships with precisely because she saw value in their work, even if she didn't fully agree with all of their ideas. Furthermore, when she had reached a certain level of maturity in her artistic and philosophical accomplishment, in the wake of Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand hungered not for mass response. She hungered for a quality individual response. She wanted it to be seen and understood in a perfectly rational way. Here she went out of her way to communicate as eloquently, as precisely, as efficiently, as profoundly as she did. And with all of that work and effort as an artist and as a philosopher, attempting to convey and communicate her ideas and values, she wanted desperately, she hungered desperately for at least one mind that could truly appreciate her work. That is perfectly natural and even a healthy kind of loneliness. Now, of course, being a genius so far ahead of her time, it was hard for her in a very hostile culture to find those who could understand her properly. Even her best students, like Leonard Peikoff, often had a hard time fully understanding her mental method, her approach to values, and he had a learning curve. So Ayn Rand, by the nature of the case, was necessarily going to be lonely to some extent because she's out there practically alone. But I would add a final comment about Ayn Rand. She valued her husband above all other human beings in her life, her rock, and he provided a psychological, emotional, he was the concretization of her values, in effect, and provided her a kind of inspiration and companionship on a sense of life level that she valued perhaps above anything else in this world except her own productive work. That's all. Yeah, Ayn Rand really did value people. And in a sense, you could say she, quote, needed people. But was she the most ferociously independent mind and soul you'll ever hear about? She sure was. Both can be true.
Yes. If you don't fully understand how much Ayn Rand valued the people she chose to have in her life, and the point there would be she was choosy is the wrong word. She was serious in her choices of who was in her life. But read the letters of Ayn Rand.
Right.
And you see her devotion, even to friends who eventually she broke with for similar reasons. But her loyalty, when she was your friend, there was no better friend to somebody like Isabel Patterson, for example. Or read her letters to her husband. Charming letters to her husband.
Are all those little love. When writing The Passion of Ayn Rand's critics, they opened the archives to me and let me look at anything. And one of the things that touched my heart the deepest were all of those, and they were constantly exchanging little love notes between each other through the decades of their relationship together, calling each other Fluff and Cubbyhole, and just the most sweetest that draw little kittens. I'm lonely without you, with the tear coming out of it. Oh, honey, we're going to meet up again. Oh my goodness, I can't wait till we see each other again. Ayn Rand the description is Ayn Rand would be at a party. The small talk would begin. She'd sit lonely in some corner. Frank would appear, and suddenly she's alive and beaming and come over to me, Frank. And so don't tell me that even the arch individualist of the last 100 years didn't find huge value in other people, but they had to be the right kind of person. They had to be the person that could reflect what she needed in that moment. Because guess what? She brought a very complete sense of I to the relationship. And so, yes, she was very demanding about her relationships. But when she did love you, you could never find a more loyal friend or a more devoted wife in one sense.
Yeah, so a rational egoist certainly can be lonely. It doesn't necessarily have to be a neurotic Peter Keating type of need. It can be simply the fact that we take our values very seriously, and there's very little higher value than a like mind, a kindred spirit, somebody who lives in the same universe that you do.
Right.
So I'm going to jump to question number 3. Is it wrong? Is it wrong to compromise one's beliefs in order to... Well, just reading that part of the question, you kind of already know the answer. But it's an important question, so let me finish that up. Is it wrong to compromise one's beliefs in order to keep a romantic partner who wants to break up? So as usual, because we've read questions with this same kind of premise, Leonard Peikoff starts out by says, if I take your wording at face value, then yes, it would definitely be wrong, because you are suggesting that if she knew your real beliefs, well, she would leave. You're basing the continuation of your romance on a pretense. She's sleeping with you, but not with you. It's somebody
Right.
else you're pretending to be, and only evasion would make it possible for you to think that this is the continuation of a romance. I love the way he puts that. It's not just you're lying and that's wrong and you're faking reality, but you're faking an entire context, a romance that doesn't actually exist. It's like a fiction.
Well, why would you want romance with someone who's falling in love with someone else? I mean, that's just absolutely incredible to me. The whole value of someone saying, hey, I admire you, or I love you, or I like you, is the point that they're using their independent judgment and seeing you for who you are. It's their accurate vision of me that gives me the value of that visibility. It's, again, this is also another great example of in order to say I love you, you first have to be able to say the I. If you're willing to compromise your basic ideas and values to stay in any relationship, it's like what Ayn Rand said, beautiful analogy. It's like the price of getting into an art museum being the tearing out your own eyes. It is the most utterly self-defeating approach. Why would I want a close relationship? Why would I want that visibility if it's not real visibility? If it's not the real me they're seeing?
Yes.
It just seems to me it's the most self-defeating thing and the most frustrating thing, because you'll never be seen for who you are.
Yeah.
If you
what are you getting?
Values and ideas. What are you getting?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Now, of course, Dr. Peikoff respects the question, so he takes it a level deeper. He says, well, you might come back and say, well, my beliefs are not all that important. She is much, much more important. So isn't it okay to compromise my beliefs? And he says, I would say your much better policy in that case is to drop the beliefs and go with hers. If your beliefs are not that important, it means you don't hold them. If you don't hold them, then why carry such harmful excess baggage? The only thing you need to do is to solve your problem. To solve your problem is to come right out in the open and say, you know, all this intellectual stuff and philosophy and ideas doesn't really mean anything to me. Now I'm going to go and sleep with her. And he ends his answer there, but that really says it all. If you can drop your beliefs, they're not your beliefs.
Yeah, exactly. If they're really on the line like that over something like a relationship or a job, and I'll make any other value, even an important value in life, if you put your so-called career or you put your so-called romance above your own deepest values, you've lost that sense of I. You're not either, you can't get anything from the relationship, nor do you have anything to give it to the relationship. It's, in effect, a fraudulent, manipulative, exploitative kind of relationship by necessity, And I don't care what the value is, whether it's, like I say, romance or career. If you're compromising who you are, your basic beliefs, and I see objectivism places a great store on thinking and thinking for yourself. And judgment has to be yours. And that's what you are. And that's what you are bringing to the table. Your ideas, your values, that's who you are. If you don't have a you there, you're not, in effect, qualified to have a human relationship. Can I be that bold about it?
Yes. And to the pragmatists out there, you know, Leonard Peikoff has a great talk, Why Should One Act on Principle? It's mostly reproduced in OPAR as well, where he explains why pragmatism doesn't mean practicality. Pragmatism is not practical.
No.
And in a case like this, what is left if you gain a value by pretense? What are you left with? What does it take to continue to keep that value? What are you actually enjoying about that? Who's even enjoying the value? Because you're not there anymore. Great talk. Why should one act on principle?
If I can summarize that with, and you know, it's funny, it's me, I you know, of all people, me quoting the New Testament, the author of Creating Christ. Let me quote my favorite line from the New Testament. For what should it profit a man should he gain the whole world but lose his own soul? The world nothing in the world, a career, a romance, owning the whole planet, can be of no value to you if you've lost your own sense of self, your own ideas and values, your own soul.
Yes. And the examples are out there in literature, in films, in real life. Bernie Madoff is the great example, but any of these charlatans or mafiosos or people who you look at and you can see they're not happy, they're not joyous. Most of them are dead in their eyes.
Right.
Whatever it is you gained, who's left to have gained and enjoyed it? You left yourself behind. You left yourself down the road.
You're now an empty suit. Do you want the empty suit to be loved, or do you want to be loved for anything that you are? In fact, yes. That's really it.
I can keep up the play, the pretense. I can still be. It's like you're in a play and you're not allowed to ever leave the stage.
Right. Must be exhausting. I've always thought that such social metaphysicians must live in a psychologically exhausting life, never being themselves.
But what if there are these traits that you have on stage that you don't have in real life? What do you do? Well, let's get to the last question here, because Dr. Peikoff was asked, well, I've always been attracted to self-confidence, innocence, and popularity. Are these true values? I'm not popular myself because I'm an objectivist. How then can I admire that in another person? Now, that's an interesting question.
It is.
It's not as obvious as the last one. You can kind of see, well, he's worried about popularity. But, I think a lot of us, admire people who seem to have that kind of charisma and that charm. Right. And so I kind of get that.
Part of what, frankly, part of what a lot of people see in actors on stage or on screen is just that. Look how darn charming Cary Grant or Katharine Hepburn is in those old movies. They're just so darn charming. Yeah. I wish I could be, have that magnetism that they had. Okay, I suppose there's a value there, but Peikoff will have, of course, the best answer. But if you break it down, sure, self-confidence is a value. To be confident in yourself is absolutely a value. You go to innocence. Well, in the right context, innocence is a value, but there could be another sense of that word. But then when you get to the third one, popularity.
Yeah.
Popularity as such, is that really, now would it be great to be loved for the right reasons? Of course. And the more people that love me for the right reasons, the better, all other things being equal. But popularity as such, popularity in this context, popularity from people who don't even understand or see the value you're putting out. Wait, hold the phone. Popularity is something I would just, from the question, put a big fat asterisk next to, if that's really one of your primary values that you're seeking from other people.
Right. So I'm going to give some part of Dr. Peikoff's answer here, which you probably have already covered, but there is so much to say about this, popularity. Yes. And there can be reasons why somebody's popular, and what you really want are those reasons. But let me read a bit of this. Dr. Peikoff says, you mentioned 3 traits. Self-confidence, of course, is an objectivist characteristic. Innocence, it depends on what you mean. Like a person without guilt, well, of course, who could oppose that? But that's a negative as stated. Do you mean naive, childlike, Pollyanna, non-cynical? It depends on the age of the person. If they're innocent at 17 or 14, that's one thing. If they're 64 and they are still naive, well, there's a question. Right. The fact that you don't want a cynic doesn't necessarily mean you want an innocent.
Right.
Now we get to popularity. Who do you want to be popular with? Presumably it's with non-objectivists, because your objectivism is what's causing the disaffection of other people. Right. They reject you because of your ideas. Well, if you admire that, if you admire them despite that, well, obviously ideas are not that important to you. And if they're not, well, why don't you just drop that? Again, Leonard Peikoff is willing to say to people, if you don't really believe this stuff, drop this stuff. But
get rid of it.
you would think a fire-breathing objectivist would say, no, eschew those people and take these ideas.
Oh, no. Objectivism is demanding. It's demanding. The normative advice that Ayn Rand gives and how to use your mind in epistemology, how we know, or the normative advice she gives in ethics, how, the basic virtues that we should deploy in life to live a successful life. Look, that Ayn Rand has a very specific, demanding philosophy. If you don't really buy in, why would you put up with all that? Why not just chuck your ideas as the inconvenience they are, open your mind to anything, and be a total promiscuous whore about what you believe?
Yes.
It's a much easier way of getting along in this world, it would seem to me. Of course, you're destroying your own soul. Of course, I don't think you really can be happy in the long run. But leaving aside those issues, wouldn't it be easier if you really don't take ideas seriously?
But isn't it fascinating that he's willing to say to people, don't wear these ideas if you think they're shackles, if you don't think that they're true.
Right.
You have to believe this stuff, and you have to believe it not because I said it, but firsthand. You have to have reached these conclusions by your own inductions. Think objectivism through induction. Small wonder that this was the man who, when things got a little ugly in objectivism after Ayn Rand passed away, some people thought Leonard Peikoff was arguing for the purity of the philosophy and throwing people out but it wasn't about that. It was about, if these aren't your ideas, you're wrong, but it's no good to force them on you. Go your own way. In a question like this, he's willing to say that same thing.
Exactly. Go your own way. Do your own thing. Please don't call it objectivism. Please don't say you're being true to Ayn Rand or promoting her ideas, but go have your different ideas. Go do it. That's your set of ideas.
And it's not going to end well, and you're not going to be successable. And I know you're wrong, but that doesn't matter.
Apart from your long-term well-being and happiness.
Yeah, it's hardly subjectivism, because I'm still willing to say you're wrong, and eventually you'll figure it out, and maybe you'll come back. But it does no good, for you to simply say, well, this is my philosophy, and therefore I have to believe these things. He goes on, have your friends socialize with objectivists to the extent you agree, but don't call yourself an objectivist, and don't make yourself into somebody unpopular just because you're martyring yourself for a cause that you don't really believe in. Now,
I love that point.
Yeah. Now, maybe you want not to be lonely, and that's why you want popularity, but then you have to say, well, lonely for what? Is it just that you can't stay in four walls with nobody else there? Then you go to Starbucks and read your books with a crowd. You want specific people around you, socializing and interacting and liking you because you have to be popular? Well, if that's what you want, then loneliness is not the explanation. It seems to me that the only explanation for putting popularity on such a stand as self-confidence is that your self-confidence is down. And so you need the approval of others to help boost it. And I think it was Nietzsche who said that there are people who run to others in order to flee from themselves. And maybe that's applicable here. In any case, if, as you say, you're not popular, but you admire popularity, you've got a problem. I think
I just have to summarize
the
point here. Human beings can be a huge value, a priceless, immeasurable value to us in so many different ways. Human beings can provide, my life would be a desert of values, but for the artists and scientists and writers, friends, my wife, who provided such value to me. It would be just really a value desert. On the other hand, for me to get the value in each of those departments, as a student of knowledge, as a member of this economy, and as a husband to the love of my life, I have to bring my own values, independently derived, my sense of self, my clear sense of self. Then and only then can I really obtain the value that others can be for me. I've got to know through my own eyes and judgment what I'm learning through others. I've got to carry my own weight in this division of labor economy to get the benefits, the economic benefits that others can provide. And in interpersonal relationships, I have to bring my own sense of values, or I can neither get or give values in that context. It really is an elaboration, in effect, on that wonderful statement from the Fountainhead. You first got to be able to say the I, to say I love you. You need a sense of, an independent sense of who you are in order to even get the value, really, much less exchange of value in those contexts. Even though human beings, obviously, other human beings are huge, immeasurable, priceless value. You know, I often say the only thing better than enjoying one of your highest values, or the only thing that, not better, because it's not, the only thing that competes with the best thing, which is enjoying your own values, is the second best thing, sharing it with someone else. And I think I'd have to put it in that exact order too. The second best thing to enjoying a great value is sharing it with someone else.
Yeah, I've always said I like cars, I like music, I like having a nice home. But the second best, the second most important thing in the world is other people.
Right.
And I have to say second best because you don't want to screw up the order. You do have to be able to say
I almost did there. Yeah. But that's the important order that Ayn Rand is calling our attention to.
But I love the expression "I love you" because take any one of those three words, "I love you." To even know what I means, the whole of me, the mind and the body, but the spirit and the passion, but also the mind that reasons. There's so much just in I. And then to say love, well, what does it mean to value somebody on that level, to actually engage with somebody to the point where you want to be with them, you want to look them in the eye, you want those interactions, you want those experiences, and then to say you, to really see, you know what it means to really be seen.
Robert,
as somebody that you really see on levels much more than just as nice as it is that they're attractive and charming and well-spoken and fun to be around, but even deeper than that, that animating spirit in them, the I in them.
That's it. Each one of those words, what you want to say is I. Everything that I am, all of my ideas, all of my values, all of my passions, all of me, I in every sense. Love, and I mean love in the real complete sense. You, and I mean you, and everything about you. And you're absolutely right. It's almost as though those three simple words are so simple and easy. They're all one syllable words. There's just three. I love you. It seems so simple, but what you're conveying there is a vast condensation. Everything I am really loves, in the full sense of love, everything you are. And when I mean everything the other person is, I don't mean we ignore their flaws, weaknesses, or psychological context. No, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. The difference between gratitude or admiration and love is just that overwhelming overspill. Someone can do things for me. They can give me things. It's not what they do for me. It's specifically go out of their way to do me a favor. Of course, I appreciate that, and I'm grateful. It's not what they give me. And under the right circumstances, if it's not a sacrifice, I'll accept it and say thank you. And it's a great value that they've given me something. I don't mean to diminish any of that, of that. But what it is I now suddenly realize there comes a point where it's not the stuff or the actions, it's the person as a whole. And now it's for the fact that you exist. As a friend, Robert, let me say this. It's not what you've given me, because you've given me a lot. You've given me knowledge. You've given me affection back. And it's not the stuff that you've done for me or given me, the thing that I'm most grateful for. It's for who you are. It's for Robert Nasir as a whole that I am most grateful for, all those moral qualities, for all those characteristics of your personality that make all those other values that emanate from you possible. And when I reach that point, when I reach the point where I say, it's you that I'm grateful for, and all that you are, and the complete package that is Robert Nasir, that's when gratitude, that's the boiling point. That's the boiling point when the state converts from mere, I'm very, very grateful, and I even admire you in some context, to, no, Robert, I love you. I love you as a friend, because it's you that you see?
I love Heinlein's line that love is that state in which the happiness of another person is essential to your own, because James, for example, you're out on the West Coast and I'm in the Midwest, and we've only seen each other in person, at OCONs.
Right. We've met a couple of times in person.
But it actually matters to me that you're out there, and it matters to me that you are well. it matters. It's important. It's significant. I need to know that. And that's how you can measure a friendship and it doesn't have to be the same as if, your family or your wife passed away, but it matters. It really has significance.
The fact that that came from you, 4 billion, 5 billion other people on this planet could say what you just said, and it would have absolutely no impact on me. The fact that you, Robert, just said that to me is getting a tear in my eye. Because you, Robert, are saying that to me, James.
Well, you're important. You matter. You matter to me, and even more than that, philosophically, in the broad picture of everything, the culture war and all the philosophy. You matter to me on the larger world stage as well. But even if you weren't already an accomplished author and an important person on the scene, just knowing that you're out there being the kind of guy you are. And I have to say then, because now it's time for me to get back to the super chat, we have a $4.99 contribution from Kindred Amy, who says, "Love you guys." So if you wonder about Amy's love for you, well, obviously it's the same as her love for me, because that's how she wrote it. Thank you for that, Amy. And Kindred Amy is somebody I just happen to know a little bit about. But it gets back to Bradley's question, which is why I wanted to come back around to this. Is love a psychological necessity? Why or why not? And it's akin to saying, are values a necessity? Is fresh food and clean air and shelter basic values a necessity? And then are psychological values a necessity? Is art a necessity? Is kinship a necessity? Is love a necessity? We live in a culture where it's all too easy for people to say, yeah, you need love, so give money to the next poor person you see.
Right.
What Ayn Rand at one point described as the great unfastidious love. But love taken seriously, love as what it really means, the most broad and deep level of your hierarchy of values.
Right.
I don't know if you would answer it the same as me, but I would say to Bradley, absolutely yes.
I would say absolutely yes. If there was really no one in my life that I couldn't share values with on that level and care about a lot, my life would be incomplete. My life would not be fully human. There would be a huge gap for which I would mourn my entire life. Fortunately, I have found love. Fortunately, I've found friends that are really important to me. And that has enriched my life in a way. I mean, if you were to, Dr. Peikoff says something about being a parent here that is really, really amazingly wonderful. He said before he became a parent, if you had explained to him all the work and stress and pressure and worry that's involved, you'd say, no way would a rational egoist ever take on that kind of burden. I mean, it's wow. Until this creature can take care of itself, and probably for the rest of its life, I'm going to be worried sick about it. Now you say to yourself, should I even have this child? And then Peikoff says, well, once you've done it, you can't imagine life without it. It's one of the top pyramid values of your entire life. One of those values you say, well, my life couldn't possibly be as happy or the same without. It's a pinnacle value to him, like romantic love or career, to have been a father. I just want to point that out. People say, well, geez, wouldn't it be easier to, just do my thing and get on with life without human relationships? I'm telling you, it may be work, it may be difficult, there may be challenges. After more than 25 years of marriage, I can tell you it does take some work. There are challenges. In a lot of ways, they're fun challenges to deal with if it's a romantic relationship. But on the other hand, there is some real work and challenges to it. Same with friendship. There's going to be disagreements, challenges, that you face in life, difficult problems you face together. But is it worth it? Yeah, human beings are a top pyramid value in life. Being without them would make my life a comparative desert of values.
Yes. I have to say there was a recent episode of Sam Harris's podcast, which really shouldn't be more popular than ours because our answers are better than his. He sat down with a philosopher, Kiran Setia. And Setia has written a book about unanswerable questions or very difficult to answer questions. And one of them was, how do people rationally decide to get married? How to have a committed love relationship?
Right.
When, if you weigh it all out, the freedom and the independence and all the things you can do if you didn't waste all your time on marriage, and sure, love is great, but and they come to the conclusion that it's ineffable, and some of these things you can't know until you get married, and there's no way to do it logically. And it was so artificial and floating. And well before I was ever married, well before I was ever a father, I could see that there are values in raising a child that can't be compared, or can be compared actually, to the freedom and the independence, or values in being single versus being married. It's not that hard if you're willing to take values seriously. I always want to say to people like Sam Harris, when they talk about grief, for example, this stuff is not that hard if you are willing to be rational. Exactly. And if you understand what values are.
Exactly right. And holding the full context, and not looking at it in a narrow compartmentalized way, or from an emotionalist subjectivist way, which unfortunately he often does in these topics, moral and psychological topics.
Yeah. And so many of these folks, think of Ben Shapiro, thinks that selfishness means go to the bar every night and try to hook up with a chick, even if you're married. It's so simplistic. And
can you imagine that being selfish?
And imagine somebody of his intelligence thinking that.
The minute I concretize Ben Shapiro's idea of selfishness, he has excluded from possibility the highest selfishness on earth.
Yeah.
My devotion to Holly. Seriously. I would no more risk all that I've built with Holly to just go pick up women at bars. Yeah. I mean, the very idea that could be selfish is just bizarre to me. He doesn't understand what real selfishness and what the higher value is at all. And so it's that context dropping here. It's not ineffable when you understand what values are and how demanding it really is. Since he's brought this up and since I brought Holly up, a funny thing is that I had, as I say, in my 20s, was a lot of romantic experimentation, and I'd basically given up. I'd basically reached a point where I said, it may never happen. I may never find a love of my life, a soulmate, a lifetime romance. Okay. And can I be happy without that? And I got to a point where I said, I guess I could be. But that's when I found it. It was just when I dropped my expectations of it that suddenly maybe my eyes were now a little more open to various possibilities. But that's when I found my soulmate. That's when I found the love of my life.
Yes.
I'd say don't give up. But on the other hand, it's a complete sense of independence that actually maybe gives you the eyesight to find your soulmate. Another thing is that I made up my mind, I wasn't going to try and impress my dates anymore. I was going to put all my flaws, scars, my own personal context, everything dubious that some date by all the red flags. I'm going to get all those red flags out of the way. And she was not put off by any of them. She was impressed by my honesty, and now it's me that she's responding to, as opposed to something phony. As I say, that I think maybe the theme here is others can be an irreplaceable, priceless, supreme value. But if and only if we bring a firm set, and to the extent that we do, bring a firm sense of ourselves, and our values to the table. When you bring a sense of your own identity, that's when you're going to have a healthy relationship. That's when you're going to get the value from other people. So my answer is, do we need other people? Yeah, we need other people in basic senses. But if and only to the extent that we ourselves bring ourselves and our selfish selves, our rational selves to the table.
You're actually the person you're advertising. It's great, because if they buy you and you're not actually that person, you're going to spend the rest of your life putting on that show, never getting off of that stage. Incidentally, we have a super chat from Johnny Spinoza, or John Y. Spinoza. Thank you for that. $1.99, and he sends good vibes to us. I appreciate that. And then there was a comment in the chat here from Christopher Smith, who says, it's not because he's dumb, but because he's smart. And I think he's referring to the Ben Shapiro thing. And Christopher, you're absolutely right. This is a battle of ideas. It's not that folks like Ben Shapiro are idiots. It's that they really believe a philosophy that says pragmatism is practical. Short range, out of context, whatever it takes to get the thing I want in the moment. There's no larger hierarchy of values than that, unless you accept his religion or some other transcendent idea. And James, you're making exactly the point that, yeah, if you are putting yourself out there and you put the real you out there, well, good, because that's what you want people to buy. And not only that, it reflects a great self-confidence to be able to show yourself everything from the very best parts of you to the parts that you're still working on. And there's nothing more attractive than self-confidence.
Absolutely. If you have a clear sense of yourself, you're actually going to get the values from other people that they potentially represent. And by the way, maybe as a footnote, you'll also be able to provide values in exchange for that. You've got a self that can actually exchange values and engage in that spiritual trade that all personal relationships really need to be, or their exploitation of some kind, manipulation of some kind. It is only on the grounds of mutual selfishness, and by that I include a mutual sense of identity and differentiation, that makes a healthy personal relationship possible.
Outstanding. Well, I think we've answered the question there. Hierarchy of values, yes, you don't sacrifice yourself. You keep yourself as your own highest value. Pretty much right after that, it's finding those kindred spirits, those people who are on the same kind of journey that you're on, even though they're doing it independently with their own ideas, their own values. Doesn't look like you, but in some ways it really does. And if we want to have the kind of relationships that Francisco d'Anconia, and we think of the other heroes of Atlas Shrugged, but I really think of Francisco and Hank Rearden, because you get to watch that friendship form.
Yeah, right.
And there's so much heartbreak and so much love in that friendship.
Right.
Comes to mind even more than Howard Rourke and Gail Wyndham, but that too.
Right. Oh, see, it's if Francisco d'Anconia had not brought this powerful, independent, self-sufficient sense of himself to it, he would have no value to offer or to gain from Hank. Hank, if he didn't have that, even though Hank is mostly the learner in this relationship, if he didn't have that, he couldn't have been worthy of that or learned the lesson that Francisco was trying to teach him, so that they could establish this beautiful brothership that you see develop over Atlas Shrugged. Absolutely. Boy, is that a model for a healthy interpersonal relationship, actually.
Yeah. And just as seriously, I want the Stephen Mallorys. I want those kind of relationships too. And I want them like the Sean Xavier Donegan. I want to go out for a beer with somebody who cares about the things I care about, even though we won't necessarily, spend all summer on a yacht together. I want every level of it. I want all of it. I want it integrated.
Exactly right. You are a very wise man, and a wise man, not just of the mind, but of the heart and of their integration, Mr. Nasir.
Well, thank you, sir. And only a man like you would understand that, would feel that the way, actually, I think everybody understands it, but only you would get it in the gut the way that you do. And I respect and appreciate that. It is enormously valuable.
I don't mean to make others have to go through this personal mutual admiration society that we're doing with each other, but that really is the essence of it here. It's really, if people are a value to us, it's not just people as such or any value or any person under any circumstance. No, it's because of who Robert is, and it's because of who I am. And if we're going to convey any message, for there to be real affection, for there to be a real interpersonal relationship of exchanged values, that's the way it has to be. It has to be selective, demanding, and based on your values and your sense of self. Well, what the heck are you doing there?
Well, I don't think I can wrap it up any better than that, James. Thank you for that. Thank you. I was going to say thank you for being a friend, but that sounds like, what was that, Golden Girls? No, thank you for being a man of extraordinary, not just values, but psychology. And so much of what you do, so much of what you say resonates with me. It I know resonates and vibrations. It all sounds very woo, but I don't know any better way to say it touches on values in me throughout the hierarchy. And I feel it viscerally. Incidentally, a big thank you to Nick Bruno in the chat. Thank you. We just received $10 to support the Ayn Rand Center UK. So I'm glad that you, Nick, enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. We've got some other folks in the chat saying the same thing. James, this is the stuff. these are the values. These are the things that matter. We've got a lot of people on the ARCUK channel, the YouTube channel, talking about, we got a lot to fight. We've got a lot to work on with the state of the world and the state of the culture and what's going on in the universities and what's going on around the world. And some of them are heartening, like what's happening in Iran, where they're once again trying to throw off the shackles, throw off their hijabs and their veils. There's so much to do, but I love that you and I can get together then and say, well, okay, that's what we're fighting. What are we fighting for? And James, I feel like I'm fighting for you and you're fighting for me. And
that's it. The people like you and people, and my values, like people like you, are the goal. And more than that, you are the fuel, that the jet fuel that pours into my engine and keeps me going. And I want to thank you for that. And it is your soul and the whole of you for which I am most grateful. Not anything you do specifically, but you, Robert, provide me emotional fuel that I need to keep going. So thank you, my friend.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you to everybody watching and listening to this. We will have more of these discussions. In fact, we will be back next Wednesday. But James, this has been a great one, at least for me, hopefully for everybody out there. At 1 o'clock, we got 1 o'clock, I'm thinking Eastern time. Within an hour, whatever time zone you're in, we do have the daily objective coming up. And I love it because Jonathan Honig is going to talk about the mysteries of space. Why do we find that scary? That's going to be a good one. I've already posted on my social network about it. We'll see if I got it all wrong and Jonathan straightens me out. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We will see everybody next Wednesday. Have an outstanding day.
Take care.